from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto Lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. If you follow me on Facebook, you will know that I was at the PHC Conference in London recently. It was a great event, and I thought it'd be nice to share some highlights with you. It would be pretty boring if it was just me rambling on at you, though, so I brought a couple of friends along to tickle your earbuds. You will be familiar with both of these extraordinary women, as they have both been on the podcast before. Louise Reynolds is a military wife to Andrew and mum of 3 adult sons. In her working life, she was the first Australian female paramedic to gain a PhD and has spent the last 15 years teaching university paramedic and health science programs in Australia and now also in the UK. Since 2015, she has been using low-carb keto to maintain her 130-pound weight loss. In her spare time, she is strength training at the gym and planning overseas travel. Susie Edge is a former NHS doctor and medical molecular biologist. She trained in the Department of Orthopaedic Surgery, but left recently to set up her own business, helping others in real food health with their digital media marketing and social media content, an area she worked in before being a doctor. Susie has been through her own health and weight loss journey, discovering low carb and the keto way of eating through the work of Gary Taubes and Robert Lustig. She now spends her time thinking about how we might get the messages of low carb and real food out as far as possible. At home, Susie is a mum of 2 girls whose diet she is finding harder and harder to influence. As is usual, I think, when you chat with friends, the conversation tends to ramble a bit all over the place. We didn't get to cover all the presentations, so do check out the show notes for links to more information about the conference as well as some video links. This meeting up in real life lark is great, and I really recommend it. Go share some inspirational experiences like this one was for me with your best internet buddies as soon as you can. Welcome back. Louise Reynolds.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be on the podcast, and it certainly was really great to catch up with you again and have some squishy cuddles. And things I missed out on catching up with you in Denver this year. And it was really good to be in London at the conference again with you.
You did, and we missed you.
I know.
And Louise, of course, you were my first ever Extraordinary Woman, as well as doing the roundup of the PHC last year, which was episode number 32.
It doesn't feel like a year, does it? Like that year has gone so quick, and certainly was a privilege to be your first Extraordinary Woman on the podcast. I certainly remember how nervous I think we both were when on that first episode, but it was really good to and a privilege, of course, to be your first Extraordinary Woman. So, and look at you thrive. You go, girlfriend.
I was terrified that first interview. It was the best person to choose to be my guest, though, because you really helped me get through it. But I still remember how very, very terrified I was.
I know. I think we were sort of obviously role playing and going through the various, questions and scenarios. But you didn't need my help. Look at you. I've launched this extraordinary woman now into podcast land, and I think I pale into insignificance with all the fans coming up to you. Apparently, that's what you were saying about Denver, all your fans.
Oh, just one or two. They don't queue up. I'm not like some of these other people who have loads and loads of fans. I will think it's a bit of a joke, really. It doesn't really compute with me. But yeah, it's very nice to meet people. It is lovely when people come up and say that they listen to the podcast and how much they enjoy it. I really do appreciate meeting people like that. It's nice. Because mostly it's very different when I've been out at these conferences and I get to record with people face to face, but I mostly do it like this, tucked away at home. So it's nice to find out that obviously I know that people listen to it. I see the download statistics, but it's nice to actually meet people in real life who listen. Anyway, so the other person we have with us today is Susie Edge, who was Extraordinary Woman number 40. Welcome, Susie.
Hello, it's great to see you again. But actually, what was really great was to meet you both as well, and some of the other listeners. Because again, I'm the same. I spend a lot of time in my phone and in my computer, and I see a lot of people, talk to a lot of people online. But actually, to meet people, to stand and chat over a coffee, it's just it's another level altogether. And it was really great to be able to do so down in London.
It was really good. It was we hadn't met in person, had we? We talked online and interviewed online. You've interviewed me as well on your podcast.
That's right. We've been back and forth, but to actually sort of meet and have a hug and be able to talk about what's going on in life beyond the airwaves. So it was really great. I got so much out of the weekend doing that with so many people. And you know what you were saying about people coming up and introducing themselves. That's not happened to me before, but it happened at that conference. People coming and saying hi to me because they'd seen me talking online, and it's a nice feeling to know that people are out there listening and getting some value out of what it is that we're doing, because that's the most important thing, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, that's why we do it at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, and that was brilliant. But there were so many people there talking and in the crowd, if you like, that it was great to meet.
Yeah, it's a really good conference. I believe it's the 4th conference so far for the PHC, which is the Public Health Collaboration, founded by Sam Feltham, but really good conference.
Sam's doing a fantastic job, isn't he? And the conference, I think it's just growing and growing. And the people that he had talking, I guess we're going to talk about Robert Lustig and Simon Hotter again, but also grassroots guys like Andy Bishop and what they're up to, all sorts of different people from different backgrounds, if you like, coming together, all with the same ultimate goal. It was something to see, yeah.
Yes, it's always nice. I really enjoy. I mean, obviously, most of the people I tend to talk to are in America and the conferences I've been to in America, but it's really nice to be on home turf. I mean, I know I live in France, but the UK is my home turf, really. And it's really nice to see what's happening there. And there is a real big movement for change. And it always makes me feel very hopeful when when I've been to a conference like that.
I think one of the things that I really came away with from the conference was one of hope. That the future, does look bright. It does feel like actually this last year for me personally has been one of huge change, big building up on top of something that I felt was quite niche and small, even only a year ago. It just feels like it's building and building momentum, and hope is a really powerful thing to be able to instill and build, I guess. So yeah, to see that was great.
And I really think that, like Susie, who would have been to a lot of professional sort of medical and health conferences, the good thing about this particular one is it's so accessible. It's a mix of case studies, from real life case studies, as well as the health professionals. There's also the mix of research presentations as well. So it's a real mix right across the board, and it really appeals to the people that have an interest, as well as the health professionals.
And what's your perspective on this, Louise? Because you're obviously an Australian, but you've been living in the UK for how long? Just well over a year now? What have you noticed that, what are maybe the big differences between the UK and Australia? And have you noticed any change in the time that you've been here?
As an Australian, it's been an interesting perspective. Obviously, I've been able to see now both the US, having been to the US conferences, as well as now the UK. The movement, as Susie was saying, the movement is slowly gaining traction. And certainly what I've seen through the PHC and being able to compare and contrast that with the US is that the PHC certainly is getting the message out there, and it is slowly gaining traction and certainly being promoted as a lifestyle. The great thing is, obviously, being here in the UK is through the NHS and the work, obviously, that David Unwin is doing, certainly through the Royal College of General Practitioners, is how he's been able to get the low carbohydrate as a prescribed through the continuing professional development, the app that Charlotte and Arjan are doing through the diabetes.co.uk. It certainly seems to be moving ahead.
So, Susie, what were your highlights? Or shall we say, let's kick off with one of your highlights, and we'll go back and forth and just chat about the conference, basically, but our best bits.
I think that I can't skip over that I was fangirling Robert Lustig.
Oh, me too.
I remember speaking to you back on the podcast last year, and one of the things I'd said that would brought me into this space, if you like, for want of a better word, was Robert Lustig's video that I saw years ago.
The sugar one, yeah.
Sugar, the Bitter Truth. And, I read his book after that, and I've sort of followed what he's been doing. And yeah, I just sat there kind of a bit in otherworldly listening to what he had to say. Actually, beyond that, what he had to say was really interesting. He talked a lot about industry influence, media influence in what was going on, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Having said that, I think one thing that's really stuck in my mind and almost stuck in my throat was a presentation given by a chap called Steve Bennett, who I didn't know before the event. I hadn't heard of him, actually, even though he's quite an excitable sort of alpha male businessman, I think, judging from seeing him on stage. He gave a talk about his own health journey and actually about his family as well. And that's why it really stuck with me, because he was very visual. And what he did was he got two clear coffin-sized boxes up on the stage, put his father in one and his son in the other. And then he went through what they would eat in a day and in a year, and he actually physically poured sugar cubes to the volume of how much they were taking in on top of them and buried them in the sugar cubes. And again, we've had these conversations before. I find it very, very difficult navigating through the world with my children, 10 and 11 years old now, trying to get them through these years where I'm trying not to push things down their throat, but at the same time trying to have these conversations with them. I wish they'd seen that. I wish they had seen that presentation, because it stopped me in my tracks. And I'm hoping it's on video, because I'll show it to them if it is.
It will be. I know last year I was waiting for the videos to come up. I'm not sure if they put them all out in one go. I was particularly waiting to see Zoe Harkham's, but I know that was up from hers was up in September. So whether they put them all up in a block or whether they release them bit by bit, but they will be online at some point. Because like you say, it was a great visual, wasn't it? Made a right old mess. There was sugar all over the stage, wasn't there?
Yeah.
But literally being buried in those sugar cubes. Yeah, it was difficult for that to hit home.
And he didn't even go the whole hog. I think he realised that it was going to be quite messy, and he didn't actually throw all of the sugar cubes that he had and that he could have done over them to represent what his son had been eating over the course of a week and at school. And there was a lot of Mickey taking out of bananas, but the boy seemed to eat a lot of them, and the sugar cube equivalent was massive when they started, when you start to be buried in these things. So yeah, that was one thing that really stuck in my head from the conference.
I really feel for you, because I have, limited contact with my niece and nephews, and see, how they're drawn towards all those kind of foods. And I remember being drawn to them myself as a child. And it must be a really difficult balance, because kids tend to rebel against what you're trying to get them to do. So yes, it must be a nightmare just trying to navigate the best thing to do, the balance between your kids sort of pushing back and rebelling against what you're telling them to do, but trying to get them to eat healthily, because obviously it's in their best interest long term while their brains are developing and everything. How do you find that balance?
There's only a certain amount of control that you have. Certainly at this age now, my eldest one is getting ready to head up to the secondary school, and she's going to have a pocket full of money every day. And, I've seen what's on offer in the canteen at the secondary school, and it horrifies me. And at the same time, I've seen the kids go off, leaving the school and going down to the local shops and coming out with their packets of Pringles and the giant bottles of Coke, and that horrifies me as well. Fortunately for me, my eldest is pretty switched on to it. She's always asking me questions. I make her bacon and eggs for breakfast every morning. It's the younger one that I might have difficulty with, but it's tricky when they hear one thing at home and when they hear something else when they're learning about it in school or when they're seeing it with their friends. And how do you navigate that? I don't know. I remember very well going off to school at her age, going off to secondary school with a pocket full of money and hitting the tuck shop
me too.
At break time. And I remember what I had, and I remember being horrified and gutted one day when they didn't have the little mini cookies that I'd become a little bit addicted to. So yeah, it's a struggle. It's a daily struggle, but all you can do is keep talking to them without pushing or denying too much, I think.
And so you think then, watching that video with that visual with the sugar cubes, do you think that is going to have the kind of impact you want it to have?
I think it would, because certainly I've sat down with the kids and watched that sugar film. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. That sugar movie with them. And they thought they were really excited by all the different, the bright colours, and it was definitely designed for family viewing, wasn't it? They really loved all that stuff. But actually, I did think the message did get through. And they often bring up, if we're in a shop, they'll look at something and they'll say, "What if I have that, Mum? Or what will that do?" I think what it is just, it doesn't work on its own, does it? It's not a standalone thing. It's just another piece in the jigsaw that builds. And if they start seeing it all over the place, if they start seeing these things in different places, then maybe the message will get through. That's what I'm hoping.
What I feel is it has to come from them. It has to be a decision that comes from them. I don't know if you've watched it already, but the Tom Norton film that he did for kids is really good, because it really talks straight to them and gives them the information so that the decision can come from them.
I've heard great things about that, and I do want to sit down and watch it with them and have that talk.
I think they'd enjoy it. And what about you, Louise? Because you've got kids in that age range.
The interesting thing about being a mum to three, teenage, the youngest is 18, the next one is 19, or just turned 20, and then the eldest is 21. You're right. It is really hard to navigate once they have that independent, disposable income. Two of the boys actually work for Burger King, or Hungry Jack's as it is in Australia. So they come home with their triple McDouble burgers and their, Coca-Cola and fries. And it is really hard to obviously launch them out into the world. But the interesting thing is then, as you were saying, is to tie it back to their health. So the eldest has like cystic sort of acne, and when we actually cleaned up his diet and we got him to move forward and commit to some lower sugar, his skin was just radiant. The middle boy has mental health, so some ADHD, and it was really good to sort of see once we cleaned up his diet a little bit how much more he became less like Tigger and Eeyore altogether, being ADHD. He sort of has highs and lows. He sort of smoothed out a little bit, and that really helped him when he was still at school. So the youngest one actually has some inflammation in his esophagus. And what was really interesting was it was really impacting on being able to sort of swallow and, in his digestion. And once we, again, sort of, got him to sort of comply, and we could only really get them to, around dinner time, is really what we could actually do for mostly, offering them low carb keto options, is really just to sort of see how it helped them individually, with their various conditions. But you're right, Susie, it is really hard to navigate the supermarkets. Certainly here in the UK, you only have to walk into a WH Smith and it's just sugar overload. And, as you know, when we're shopping, we just try and keep, to the outside, to the perimeters of the supermarket where all the fresh produce, and obviously just sort of dodge and weave through the middle aisles to be able to make obviously cleaner, smarter choices. And certainly here in the UK, what I've noticed is the food quality is really excellent. You've got some excellent dairy, the range of cheeses, and, whether you want, clotted cream, double thick cream, certainly
all the cream,
clean products, all the creams. I need to try goat's butter. Is that right? I need to sort of try that, cultured goat's butter. So that's next on the list when I pop over to Waitrose. And certainly you guys here in the UK have the privilege of having more than what we only have in Australia. We have what we call the duopoly. We either have Coles or Woolies, but you guys have everything, from, 5 or 6 different supermarkets to choose from. So, so the world is your oyster here in the UK for food quality.
It's nice that we're good for something. So yes, we've gone a little bit off track there, but we started with Robert Lustig, and I agree. I would say he was the heavy hitter, wasn't he? He was last year we had Tim Noakes as the real heavy hitter, and Lustig was the heavy hitter this year. I tell you what I liked, actually, that I think after just about every presentation, when Sam asked for questions, he threw in a question, didn't he? He threw in lots of really interesting questions at the end of the other presentations.
He really demonstrated his knowledge and his ability with biochemistry and physiology. His questions were really quite in depth at some points. And I remember, he started talking about pathways to uric acid production, and everyone started looking at each other thinking, slow down, Robert, slow down. We got to keep up. He's an incredibly knowledgeable guy. And he was, as you say, he wasn't just there to present and disappear. He was there to be involved with all the other talks and what was going on, and to chat about them and to put in his tuppence worth was great to hear as well. Absolutely.
And Louise, what was your top?
I didn't realise that the bitter truth about sugar is actually over 10 years old now.
Yeah.
That's an interesting fun fact, that he's been obviously involved in the low carb or, in that particular research space for quite some time. And that's obviously demonstrated by his, certainly his engagement and his knowledge of the research and that information that he was willing to share and provide.
Yes, and like Susie said, that's a good point to make, actually. He was very involved in the conference as a whole. Like you say, he wasn't just there to present. He really did get involved.
Mm. I think he'd been involved as well in discussions the day before with the
mayor. We saw on Twitter.
I saw some tweets about that. Yeah, they met with Sadiq Khan, didn't they? And had some discussions. Louise, what was your top highlight? Where would we start with you? Which bit did you enjoy the most?
I think that the top highlight for me was hearing about Tom Watson and about his personal health journey. And that's obviously for two reasons. I think it was really to see how, in perhaps a future government change here in the UK, that, someone as he's the opposition spokesperson for health here in the UK, how his health journey has impacted, and potentially we're talking about policy changes to the Eat Well plate and also future health promotion and health education. As some of the listeners might know, is that I'm teaching at the moment here in the UK at the university and in health. So it'd be really interesting to sort of see in the future, what kind of policy changes may or may not impact here, based on the fact that this one individual has had a significant health event. So what was really interesting was seeing him talk to the fact that he had to keep it quiet. His own health journey about what he was doing, he had to keep it quiet for 2 years because he was going against what was his government, the current government's guidelines. So this was a really interesting thing about what's called being a wounded healer. And it's an interesting philosophy that for someone to have this personal insight, he had to go through it himself. And that's really where we know, both Daisy and I and Susie, we all know that through our health journey, we become quite, charismatic and revivalist, and we want to get the message out, and we get very animated, and have you got a pulse? Are you breathing? Let me tell you about my journey. We become quite proselytizing about, the benefits of what we've seen. So for this guy, who's a parliamentarian, while in opposition, he's actually sort of, campaigning and agitating. And the interesting question that came from the audience is, well, so what? What now? What can we do? And he's trying to obviously get the current health minister on board. But, they're quite fearful because we've got Public Health England, we've got obviously, interest groups and bodies and professional associations with all these vested interests. And that sort of obviously links in with what Robert was saying about corporate interests. And, this is the thing, that like the Pantene ad is, it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Do you remember that ad? Anyway, marketing. But it's going to take, obviously, what Robert was saying. We're in 8 years into this 30-year cycle, so we have this very long flow change. But we have one person who's had a significant life experience of reversing diabetes, losing weight, gaining health benefits, which, when you think about it, his transformation taps into also what you heard with Jen and David Unwin at Denver about having his best hope. His best hope was to be playing with his children, and that's the sorts of things that he's gained in his health benefits. So I think, I was slightly, optimistic and hopeful that as a parliamentarian that there will be some real change, obviously, here in the UK for the future around changing health guidelines. And it needs to be top down. We've got that groundswell from the case studies that we heard, like as Susie was saying about Steve Bennett. We've got people like Patrick Holden, who was talking about sustainable farming and his health benefits. Andy Bishop, who is one of the PHC ambassadors, and how he has changed and, healed himself, reversing type 2 diabetes. Even Giancarlo Caladesi, reversing diabetes. We know that it works. We've lived it. We've experienced it, but it needs to come now from top down with the change of guidelines. It's
so powerful, isn't it, when you experience it yourself? And he would make a fantastic health minister. I think it was actually put out, wasn't it? So someone in the audience said, because he's obviously the deputy at the moment, that he should be the next health minister. That would be perfect. He was complaining, wasn't he? Because he said that all he ever gets asked about, all he can ever really talk about is Brexit. And he wants to just forget about that and focus on changing health policy for the better.
I thought it was quite funny when he told us, he sort of said that Jeremy Corbyn was a vegan.
Yeah.
And suddenly you've got this huge gulf between, how they obviously think about it all. I thought that was really interesting because perhaps Health Minister isn't where he's going, but another job altogether.
Absolutely.
So what about you, Daisy? What was your highlight?
Well, I had quite a few. I always love watching Zoe Harcombe. I think she's incredible. And considering actually I'd seen the same presentation already at Denver, I still really enjoyed seeing it again. This time she was talking about fiber, and she always puts things across so clearly, but really condenses potentially some really quite complicated information, but puts it across in such an entertaining way. She always makes the audience laugh. She's very animated, a really, really great speaker. So I really enjoyed watching that presentation again. And I just loved how she really rammed home that carbohydrates are non-essential and spelt out, what carbohydrates were. She showed you the building blocks of how carbohydrates are put together, so from simple carbohydrates, glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then how you built those to more complex carbohydrates and then on into starch and fiber and all sorts of things. But she showed you how it all worked. And then she said, but carbohydrates are actually non-essential. Therefore, fiber is non-essential. So why are we being told we have to eat 30 grams a day? It just doesn't make sense. And I love how she breaks everything down into the simple logic. And when you throw in a bit of toilet humour as well, you're always going to always going to appeal to Brits, aren't you? So, and I've always thought that, and I've seen the big difference with playing around with a carnivore diet, that less goes into the toilet. and when you think about what goes into the toilet, waste goes into the toilet. So if there's less going in, that kind of implies that your body is taking more and not disposing of the stuff it doesn't need, which is the fiber. And that's not to say, and I do love the way she balances out and says, look, I'm not saying don't eat fiber. I'm not saying don't eat vegetables. I'm not saying don't do any of these things. What I'm telling you is that they're not essential, that a lot of the things you're being told are basically not true. Here are the facts. Make up your own mind. And, and if you do want to eat fiber, and most people who eat low carb and keto do. And I love the way she compared the sort of statutory guidelines type fiber, where they big up things like baked beans. And then she compared that with the kind of fiber we eat that we get from things like leafy greens, and stacked them up against each other and said, actually, the kind of fiber that we're eating has much more bang for its buck than the kind of fiber they're suggesting anyway. So we can beat you at your own game. And I just love how she pulls it all apart, builds it back up again, and provides a really good argument in a very entertaining way. What did you two make of that presentation? Because I'd seen it before, so I knew what to expect and I knew I was going to enjoy it. But what about you two?
Just to note, it's actually up on the Low Carb Denver website. I just actually saw it. So it's been released just a couple of days ago, and it also includes the video and also the slides and the PDF, just so people at home know what we're talking about.
Perfect. I'll put that in the show notes.
So you're right. I mean, who knew that we didn't really need to eat fiber? We were told to obviously down our glass of Metamucil if we're feeling a little bit constipated, and to think that all we're doing is just putting more concrete into perhaps an already clogged system. And like you, I've been experimenting with carnivore and pretty much lazy carnivore now. And I've got to say, I'm doing okay without my 30 grams a day of insoluble fiber. So just rest assured that, that's okay. So what goes in does come out, and you're right. I mean, it doesn't have to be a whole bunch of, baked beans, and what else do they have? All those healthy whole grains that we need to be eating, wheat bix.
Of course, the heart healthy whole grains.
Oh, sorry, yes, heart healthy whole grains. And, but you're right. I mean, what she was showing, and she had a beautiful infographic, which you can actually sort of see when you watch the video or on the PDF, is that in that top left corner, when we have the high high fiber, low carbohydrate, you're still getting high fiber. It's just green fiber instead of brown fiber. And you're right. I mean, she's such an excellent communicator, and she is able to easily translate the science, makes it very accessible for those, in the presentation. So it's just a great message that she's able to translate.
It's a great infographic, isn't it? I'd forgotten about that, the A, B, C, D, and she'd broken it down and saying that some of them were getting demonized, and he'd forgotten about was it group B that just had the the good stuff, the protein foods and the dairy and the vegetables.
Yeah, and certainly that infographic had the scale of what from high carb to low carb, and then it was and on the other side it was obviously the fiber content. And she was sort of saying that those of us that are low carb still have, in that top left corner, still have high fiber but low carbohydrate, as opposed to having high fiber, high carb, which was obviously all those the healthy whole grains. So it's really redundant argument in terms of we can still get our fiber just at a lower carbohydrate level, and it's equally fine.
I think that it was really interesting, the discussion that was had between Zoe and Robert Lustig as well, actually, because I said earlier I've been sort of following him for a while. And he actually talks a lot about fiber, and he talks a lot about, so one of the things about fast food is that it has to be consistent throughout the world, wherever it is. If you want to go into a McDonald's or, Hungry Jack's? Wherever you are, that it has to be the same. And one of the ways to transport food is to actually strip out the fiber, because that's the stuff that goes off, goes rancid, goes whatever. His argument is that if you're eating a lot of fiber, then, it does the good things that it does in the gut when it interacts with what's going on in the gut, that we're talking a lot about nowadays, that you're producing short chain fatty acids in there and ketones and all the like in the gut, and all. Isn't that wonderful? It's a good job. We've got all that fiber. And really that was Zoe's response was, yes, but the low carb people can have the fiber if they want it, but the zero carb fiber people are doing great as well. And it was good to see that. I would really recommend going and watching her video as well.
What was really interesting, you're picking up on a great point about the microbiome.
Yeah.
Because Dr. Pratama Singh actually is a consultant psychiatrist from Hertfordshire. Did I say that right? Hertfordshire?
Yep.
And she actually had some really interesting points about, obviously she's a treating consultant psychiatrist, and she has also focused quite a lot on the gut microbiome. And she had a great slide up there about the individual bacteria that are responsible for the hormone production. And that was actually something new to me. I obviously have been hearing quite a lot about, the gut and the role of the gut as a second brain, and the importance of keeping a healthy gut. But to actually know that science has actually identified the particular strains of bacteria that are responsible in the production of various hormones such as dopamine and serotonin, particularly ones that are related to mood, as she's obviously treating people with anxiety and depression.
That was absolutely fantastic to hear, because she was really talking about the increasing mortality gap in serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar, and also the links as well with cardiovascular mortality, with poor diets amongst her patients. And then to be able to come back and have absolute specifics there about the hormones was really great to hear as well. I've heard her speak before, and she has so much packed into her talk that I didn't really take it all in last time, but to be able to sit and listen to her this time, I really did get more out of it in terms of what you were just saying. Unfortunately, on my way home, I got on the train, which was a long train journey home the next day, and I grabbed a bottle of kefir and downed it, and I ended up spending the rest of the train journey in the toilet. It didn't go well.
Was that just too much sugar? Too much lactose in there, or it's fermented lactose though?
I don't know what happened there. I do eat a lot of yogurt and those sorts of things. It was a very odd thing. I don't know what was in it specifically that went right through me, but it's like a toilet brush right through me. So I'm not going to go there again. But she talked a lot about that, and I was quite taken with all that. Hey ho, you can't win everything, can you? Back to my steak.
As a health professional, I really did enjoy hearing from, it was Dr. Paula Powell.
Yes, definitely.
She's a palliative medicine specialist, and obviously Dr. Pratama Singh, and obviously Dr. Ian Lake, who are these practicing medical professionals. Joanne McCormack is a GP as well, and it was really good to hear from these particular health professionals as to how, these change and how we can actually help, promote and educate. And we have this advocacy of health professionals in being able to prescribe low carbohydrate diets. Interestingly, it was a great to have James Goulnick, who's a dentist, and he actually was saying from another perspective, not just on our physical health, our body health, but also how teeth are almost like the canary in the coal mine, that it really is one of the first things that we know that affects in terms of having a higher sugar, higher carbohydrate diet is our teeth and obviously cavities. And the way that we actually have food rewards, we actually, praise kids, here, have a lolly, or have a sweet, have this, have that as a food reward. And that's, we need to actually be thinking what other types of rewards that we can have.
I noticed from last year when we were both there, weren't we, Louise? And got lots of little spot interviews from people. And we spoke to a number of GPs, didn't we? It's really heartening, I think, to see GPs there. And it was nice to have a presentation from Professor Maya Lakhani, who is the president of the Royal College of GPs, which is also the location, the venue for the conference. And it's a fantastic venue, actually, isn't it? Really conveniently located right next to Euston Station. But something I wrote down in my notes that he said that's part of the foundation of the teaching they have, but it was a phrase that I particularly liked, that he said was caring with compassion and science. And I think quite often people complain about their doctors not getting it, not being on board with keto. And I think what's always worth remembering is that at heart, everyone who trains to be a doctor of some kind has the patient's best interest at heart and enters into that profession. I think, I know you would probably agree, Susie. I mean, this is you. You enter into it wanting to help people and help people get well. And whether it's not always possible to do that and to do as much as you'd like because you're held within the constraints of the system, but people go into it. So at their core, that's what they're all about.
I think you're absolutely right. And there's this ongoing joke about medical school interviews and trying to get into medical school. And the question is always in there, why do you want to be a doctor? And nobody wants to say the same as everybody else. So we try and come up with different ways of saying, because I want to help people. But ultimately, that is one of the main features of it. Yeah, we like the science, we like all the physiology and the anatomy and all those other things. There's a certain amount of prestige that comes with it as well. But ultimately, I think that you couldn't keep going in the profession if that was something that if you were in it for something else, if you like. And doctors might be concerned about what it is you're bringing to them. If you're coming to them and asking about keto or something along those lines, they might be concerned because it's not something that they've learned about. It's not something they've been exposed to. But I think the majority of them actually are open-minded and want to hear more and want to learn new things and take things forward. I really do. I think there's a lot of negativity about, doctors don't care about all that and they're just worried about the bottom line. Certainly in the UK, I don't believe that's the case at all. I think that actually helping people is the primary reason to be there. And the president has got a point there.
And it's really heartening, isn't it, to see that's one of the things that's nice to see, that so many of them are attending conferences like this one to find out more about the low carb community. And then, as you've both mentioned already, the work that the Unwins are doing is phenomenal and really making that impact now. He's part of the NHS training and guidelines. I mean, you can't get much more impactful than that.
I think it's really easy to go to a lot of different conferences, and I was getting a bit concerned that I was going to start hearing the same things over and over. And actually, was it worth going to the conference? But even David Unwin, although he's, known now, he's a low carb GP, he's known for all that sort of stuff. Even he changed tack a little bit and told us a little bit about blood pressure and what else he'd seen, because he's got all this data. He has got an incredible amount of data for his patients that he's collected, in some ways almost not knowingly over the years, but they've got all this on their back systems that he's able to look at now and to be able to compare. So he talked about blood pressure and the effects that he was having on being able to stop people's or reduce people's medications, people who have been on blood pressure medications for years, being able to come off it with a low carb diet that he'd been guiding them through.
And salt, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like fat clogging the arteries. Salt is going to send your blood pressure through the roof. So he was looking at salt, wasn't he? What was it called? Don't blame the salt for what the sugar did. Mm-hmm. That was his tack, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the influence that he's having is worldwide. Actually, if you start listening to various different podcasts, you'll hear him there talking to the guys in America, the likes of Sean Baker on his podcast, and then over Australia, his influence isn't just happening in the UK in the NHS, which is phenomenal with the low carb program. What Charlotte and Arjan are doing with that, with his support, it's going beyond that for David Unwin, and I think that he is he's just the nicest guy, and I think he always looks a little bit sort of taken aback that anyone's interested in what he's got to say, which I love about him.
No, absolutely. They were very, very well received in Denver. They did a fantastic presentation. David and Jen did some role playing with how they talk to patients and how to get the best out of that relationship. It was really interesting.
I said to Jen actually that I'd seen that because I wasn't in Denver, but I'd seen that online and how it was a fantastic presentation. I was so happy to share it with people. And even she was the same as David. She was a bit taken aback that somebody was excited about it and wanted to share it. And it's lovely to see their response.
Yes, they're lovely people. I always enjoy meeting them. We were on the same plane out actually to Denver, so I kept bumping into them on the trip, which was really nice. Very lovely people. You mentioned earlier Andrew Bishop, and I think this is a nice thing that they always do at the PHC, and you mentioned this, Louise. They take some normal people, some average people, and they tell their story and what they're doing. But what I found particularly interesting with him was the massive influence that he was having on his local GPs and the community, and how, he had to really work at shoehorning himself in there and getting himself heard. But once he was, how they were really rolling with it and really letting him, run the low carb courses and things that he was doing. And, I don't know about you two, but I was really impressed. I didn't know what to expect. When I went into the presentation, I thought it was just going to be his story, and his story was interesting, but it was the bit that really impressed me was this massive effect that he's having. And, and he's not a GP, he's not this person of great influence. He's just this normal person who's become an ambassador for the PHC. And I think it just goes to show the massive ripple effect that the PHC is having in the United Kingdom.
That's right. I mean, he's just a lay person that has a health journey that, as we were sort of saying, we become quite charismatic and proselytise, and we want to get that message out. The fantastic thing that the PHC has is a program of volunteers called ambassadors. And it's that ambassador program that links in, certainly here in the UK, through the NHS, through the GP surgeries, where they become advocates for the low carb program. And you're right. I mean, it's Charlotte and Arjan's work as well that's getting out there. That is part of what is the evidence base. And it's that evidence base that's, documenting and validating. And now with the data that certainly David Unwin has also published as well. And as we know, the US with the Verta trials and other studies that, this approach has a significant evidence base for being able to reverse diabetes. So you're saying that it's that particular health journey that one man, but now with the programs such as the PHC's Ambassador program, that is really getting the message out. Apparently, Sam actually had a conference, an ambassadors conference, and they had 60 ambassadors there that were able to obviously, come together as a collective and embody and embrace their collective journeys and how best that they can actually get that message out. I really would love for Sam to be able to at least document those particular journeys, that particular program, evaluate the program so that can then be modelled, hopefully on a wider scale, internationally.
Good point.
To be able to get that out and to sort of say this isn't just N equals 1 now. This is, like Sean Baker says, N equals many. That we actually have a particular program of lay people that can, support through the healthcare system and, be responsible at the local level.
Because the PHC has started in Australia now as well, hasn't it?
That's right, yes.
It would be easy to roll out the ambassador program as well.
There. Yeah, and you're right. And the opening remarks on day 2 was by sports physician Dr. Peter Brockner, who also has his particular, he's the chair of the PHC for Australia. He also has his charity, Sugar by Half, and he also, was able to give quite a animated, it's quite a comical, Aussie larrikin approach to the State of the Nation address. So, and that sort of kicked off on day 2.
Peter Bruckner's presentation, again, it was fantastic. He's a very funny chap. And something tells me Sports Liverpool Football Club. I'm not sure what makes me.
Yeah, there are a few clues in there.
He was the chief medical officer for Liverpool for a few years. I think he was there for about 3 or 4 years before he took up the chief medical for the Australian cricket team.
He talks about using low carb for athletes, and that's always really good to listen to. But his State of the Nation address was really comprehensive. He covered a lot of things. He talked about what's going on at a local level in the UK, things like people like the unwins, but he also talked about Eat Lancet, which is obviously a global issue, and the response to that throughout the world, which was really interesting. I've
forgotten the percentage that he mentioned about what you need to make change. That you get the, is it called early responders? And he had it all marked out in percentages, didn't he?
Yeah, the early adopters and...
Early adopters, that's it. Menopause brain. It always makes me think of the much cited comment by Gary Fettke about what it takes to change the direction of a school of fish, and it's the 3% that you need to change. And once you've change that 3%, the whole of the rest of it will follow. And so actually, when you're trying to make a big change, you don't need to think about changing everyone. You just need to think about working on changing that 3%. And I wonder where we're at with that. I have a feeling that change has occurred already. I think we're on that trajectory now. That's what I feel. I don't know if, and I haven't been in this community for more than a few years, but I feel in that time that percentage has been passed and we're on that change now. The cruise ship has started to make that turn. I think we're there. What about you?
I had a fascinating conversation with Ivor Cummins, actually, down in London, about his strategy for doing what he's doing and who he wants to talk to and how he's trying to get his message out there. So Ivor was saying that in a way he feels like that the low carb community that he's been talking to for a while is almost exhausted, that people are on board, people are listening to what he's got to say, and now he needs to find a way of getting outside of that community, because otherwise he's just preaching to the converted now. And how do we do that? That was a really interesting conversation. We talked about how he could get out into the corporate world to try and get his specific message out there. So that's going to be really interesting to see how, if we want to reach other people, reach further afield, reach new people, new listeners, how we do that. That's going to be really interesting. But I think that you're right in saying that. He almost confirms that we've reached a critical mass, if you like.
Yes, that is interesting. So what were his or your ideas? I'd be interested to hear what the sort of thoughts about how to reach out further.
I think for me, I was very much thinking about my own environment. I live in Aberdeen. Aberdeen is they call it the oil capital of Europe, but it's absolutely fascinating what's happening here now is that we're having real trouble in terms of people's health. People who work offshore, for instance, they're having to take fewer people on the helicopters each time because everyone's so much bigger. They can't get as many people on the helicopters, and they're having to rejig things in that way. And then when people are doing the training, the water training that they have to do to be able to travel on the helicopters out to the rigs, they have to have specific measures in place for people who are so much bigger. Obviously, it's not just about weight, but that demonstrates that we've got health issues going on. And then, of course, the safety record in the North Sea is actually very high, but I don't know about the health record in the North Sea. How many people are we actually evacuating off the rigs when they do get poorly, heart attacks and health problems? So that would be a really interesting way to try and get him out into the corporate world. And I think we have to start looking at things that way. If we want to speak to people about these, we have to look at how it's going to affect health matters from a industry point of view. And in a way, we have talked about this before. We've discussed the idea of how health matters might be discussed more and changed more from an insurance point of view. And that's coming. I think we've already seen that. But I think these big oil companies that are having to deal with all these issues with their staff actually might need to start taking these things on board and thinking about them. So it'd be interesting to see how Ivor manages to get out into that corporate world. But I think that would be a good place for him to start. Might drop him an email about that.
That's a very interesting point, actually. And there were some presentations at Denver. A guy from Swiss Re, I believe, talking about insurance and the impact in that area and how it makes sense to adopt this kind of lifestyle. I quite like the idea of working with the oil rigs, because the potential there is great. There's potential there to follow the data as well, because you've got them isolated. There are some quite interesting things you could do there, aren't there? But it is interesting how, when you mentioned that corporate cycle, I mean, Silicon Valley is known for sort of taking up with the whole keto thing, isn't it? So
yes, yeah,
why not just start picking off some other different industry groups and getting them interested?
One other thing that he said about that is that actually the massive companies that are making all this stuff, the food that we're getting really annoyed about, all the processed stuff, they've got all the massive finances, and therefore they've got massive influence to get their products out there in front of people. And really what we have in a way is not anywhere near that. Now, Ivor has a good financial backing, but he's looking for others and more. And actually to find people at the head of big businesses to then help financially is very, very hard, because they don't want to put their business at risk being associated with something that other people are calling a fad. So that's a really tricky thing for him to do. And I guess in Silicon Valley, they've got a bit more autonomy and leniency. I guess they can play around with things like that. And all of a sudden, someone being a carnivore, someone, for instance, like Jack Dorsey being a carnivore in Silicon Valley is actually pretty cool, but it's not going to affect his business. And therefore, there are a lot of, CEOs and people who are perhaps interested in changing their health and are having issues. People like Tom Watson, who's changing them and have to keep it quiet because they don't want that to influence what's to come. I think that's all really fascinating.
What about you, Louise? Do you feel hopeful for how things are going?
Yeah, I certainly do. The points that you were making about, the champions, who are our champions in moving the movement forward, and certainly looking at corporate interests, both negatively and positively, and looking for corporate champions who can move this forward. And we're already seeing with Tom Watson and his own personal health journey that we can start thinking about how can we change laws. But you're right about the corporate interests and whose interests are best being served by keeping things the way that they are. It only took Tom Watson to sort of call out about Coca-Cola or McDonald's.
That's right.
And
Both,
he got invited to, yes, that's right, McDonald's, to come and work in a McDonald's restaurant for a day.
Oh, yes, that's right. He's got to go and work in there.
So he sort of said something about, on BBC Radio about McDonald's being the purveyor of fine foods that they are, that they are making people fat and come and work in the restaurant. I mean, McDonald's is fine, just hold the bun and the fries and you'll be fine, and the Coke. In terms of being hopeful, if anybody follows me on Twitter, I was obviously, being a paramedic, I'm hopeful that paramedicine can actually pick up this as well. You know, because paramedics are on the front line and they do see a lot of the effects of chronic disease at obviously very acute times. And I'm really hopeful that certainly this could be a new area for paramedics in primary care, in public health. Paramedics here in the UK work in GPs, surgeries, so they have access to being able to use the NICE guidelines, of which Dr. Unwin's information is part of the NICE guidelines. So there are ways and means that we do have pockets of hopefulness and perhaps looking a little bit differently about where we can get the message out and who we can recruit through better education. So whether that is in medical schools, because as we know, doctors only receive a minimum of, or if that, 1 hour to 4 hours of nutrition education, that there are different ways to, to be able to get the message out.
Well, it was wonderful to share the conference with both of you and to chat about it here today. Looking forward already to next year's. Personally, I hope it's going to be in London again because it's so convenient, but they seem to have settled on that as a really good venue, and it does seem to be. I can't compare it to the venues they've been in previously, but I get the impression that it works well there. Maybe you could round up as usual with a top tip for the listeners. Who wants to go first? Looking at me like, oh, you forgot to mention the top tip.
My top tip would be to, when the videos come out from the PHC conference, would be to go and check out Trudy Deakin's talk, because that was fantastic and we didn't talk about it, which is a real shame. But definitely go and hear what she's got to say about things like how much glucose the liver produces actually in response to cortisol and stress and lack of sleep and all that, because that sort of thing really needs to be in the discussion as well. And I think her talk was brilliant, and we didn't talk about it enough, but go and check out her video.
My top tip is, if you're on Twitter, pick your Twitter battles carefully. What's really interesting was when I was tweeting from the conference, and I was trying to, in the 120 characters that you have, is to try, when you're trying to encapsulate the message from the presentation, as I was saying about Tom Watson, and you get angry, vegans or angry dietitians responding to you, is just pick your Twitter battles carefully.
You're much more of a tweeter. What, I don't know, what would I call you? I don't know. I'm more of a Facebook. So we were sitting next to each other, and you were knocking stuff out to Twitter, and I was going for Facebook instead. I find it a lot easier. But I hear many people talking about Twitter and how you can get into all sorts of spats. So I think it's probably best that I keep my involvement Twitter to a minimum. As you know, I tend to get a bit heated.
It was interesting because, and informative, certainly when we were talking about guideline changes, and some of the UK dietitians were saying, well, low carbohydrate has been in the guidelines, in their dietary guidelines, but not for diabetics. This was the thing. This was the point that I was making. So, it was just obviously best walk away from the Twitter account at that time. So it's okay.
Wasn't it David Unwin who said, he went along similar lines with saying, just be, who was it who came up? Someone came up with a question, and I don't think it was after his presentation, it was after somebody else's. Was it a nutritionist was asking how to deal with GPs, when I think she had a client who had some issues that when it touched onto medical issues, she didn't know quite how to best deal with it. And he offered an opinion, and I think he might have said something about this in Denver as well, about just being pleasant and respectful and courteous to whoever you're speaking to when you're trying to get your message across. And that's certainly how they come across. And they always are received very well. And I think there's something about that, isn't there, in refraining from letting the red mist come down and get antagonistic and getting into these spats on Twitter or wherever, and just being very calm, very calculated, very respectful, and just getting your information across, despite people who might try and combat it.
One tweet that I saw actually during the conference said something along the lines of 50% of what's said at that conference is wonderful and 50% is absolute, is produced by nutters, which is a shame. And I thought, you're not, well, that's exactly what it said. And I thought, well, you're not here. And that's an influential dietitian in the UK who spends an awful lot of time on Twitter. And I just thought, well, that was actually levied at who was talking. Which I thought was really interesting, because I thought, you're not here. You haven't heard any of this. You're not here.
Perhaps you should attend and tweet from the conference rather than tweeting about it.
Absolutely. I mean, you can come and sit in the conference and tweet that what's being said is rubbish if you want, but you're doing that from afar without even listening. And that's an opinion that actually was formed long before any of us took our seats in that lecture theatre, I saw that. I didn't respond to any of that. I didn't get involved with that. As Louise said, I pick my fights, if I have any at all, on Twitter now very, very carefully, because, you're never going to change anybody's mind on Twitter. I thought that was really interesting. Those things are going to happen. And the more you're out there talking about things, the more it's going to happen. I don't know about anybody else, but I have an incredibly thin skin.
Me too.
So yeah, I take Louise's advice, and just pick my fights carefully.
That was in response to the thread that I had put out about Tom Watson's journey. And basically the tweet was, Tom Watson is the wounded healer. This is inspiring, and hopefully this will become, the inspiration for health policy change. About, obviously, I did a series of tweets during his presentation. And when he sort of said about having to be quite muted, he said that he had to be a dissident. He had to have, be quiet for 2 years while he went on his health journey. He went against the national guidelines, which were recommended. And that's when obviously the thread flowed on, and not only just the one dietitian, but then they tag all their other dietitian friends, which then pulls in the tsunami. And then the tweet, obviously, Susie saw about, the conference is, 50% okay and 50%, rubbish. And that's what I'm sort of trying to say, that they lost the message of my original tweet, which was Tom, hopefully his health journey is the instigator of change.
Yes, that's the problem, isn't it, with social media? People just get stuck in, and like you say, normally at a distance, they're not even there, and it goes far, far away from where it actually started. But yes, my advice to that person would be, come attend next year and see for yourself. See if it really is 50% good and 50% rubbish. I think you'll find different when you're there, but there's only one way to find out, isn't there?
Yeah, well, I hope to be there again in London with you. There could be another top tip. Never leave home without pork scratchings. I must say, the Marks and Spencer's pork scratchings were absolutely a top tip from Daisy. Well worth recommending. A little bit pricey for the 40 grams for £1.50. But well worth it. Those 4 packets that I picked up the other day were absolutely delicious, I must say. Thank you for that. Yeah,
they're definitely my favourite. I tested a few different scratchings while I was in the UK, and the M&S ones were my favourite. Good old M&S.
Yeah, I actually bought out the ones down here in Chelmsford, so I'm just waiting on
just waiting for their next delivery.
We have an M&S in our hospital, but they don't sell pork scratchings because they're not very healthy.
Oh no,
they're not healthy.
That's what you need. That's what you need to lobby the hospital M&S to get you a strip of pork scratchings.
To be fair to them, they have a good low carb selection going on, so we won't have a go at them too much.
Oh, it's got a bit better then. I remember when we were speaking the first time round, you were saying they had awful things, awful selection of food in quotation marks available to you. It sounds like perhaps they've upped their game a little bit.
Well, they've upped their game at the expense of selling out to Marks and Spencer's, I suppose, which is how hospitals have to run and make their money, isn't it?
I guess so. But yeah, at least if it's M&S, there's likely to be some kind of decent choice there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Across the corridor, there's a W.H. Smith, which Louise mentioned earlier as well.
Oh, they're shocking.
They're really shocking. It's newspapers and chocolate.
Absolutely. And I went to buy some, I think it was at the airport when I bought something in Smith. I can't even remember what I bought. I think it was some water or something. And the guy tried to get me to buy chocolate.
Yeah.
No, yes, please don't tempt me. I don't want to have it. But they really try and force it on you at the tills, don't they? With their offers, buy one, get 3 million free. It's really not fair. Anyway, thank you very, very much, ladies, for spending this time with me. It's been a really nice throwback to when we were all together last week. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. I want to be back there again, see everybody again, and we've got to wait a whole year, unfortunately.
Well, next year. So we're going to see you again there next year, presumably. Sounds like it.
Absolutely. I've already made a pitch to Sam about what I could get up on stage and tell everyone about.
Oh, how exciting. Can't wait.
Oh, that sounds exciting. Yeah, I hope to see Susie, and certainly it was lovely to catch up with some of the other ladies. I know some of the other ladies that through our Facebook group. Debbie and Heidi, we caught up for dinner, and we saw Jackie and Lisa was there.
That's right.
And it was really great to connect. Obviously, we get to connect on Facebook or through the interwebs, but actually having squishy hugs with people in real life, adds a whole new dimension.
It's really nice, isn't it? It seems every new conference or event I attend, I manage to get to meet some more lovely ladies in real life. It's great. I love it.
Come away really boosted and motivated. And
I know it's all your fans, and they all want your autograph.
No, nobody's ever asked for my autograph. I think that would be going a little bit too far.
Yet. Nobody's asked you yet. It's a challenge.
It's selfies now, isn't it?
I'm a shocker for selfies. I always forget, but we did get one, didn't we? The three of us. I shall put that in the show notes. And I managed to get one with Robert Lustig, which I was very pleased with, and Dr. Ian Lake. He was another highlight actually for me. It was just nice to get to chat with him and to say thank you. Really, he was the one who whetted my appetite to find out more about type 1s after watching his presentation last year. And then went on to interview Carrie Diulis and get to speak to lots of type 1s and people working with type 1s at Denver. So it was really nice to be able to thank him in person. And I'm hoping he's going to appear on the podcast in the not too distant future.
Oh, that would be brilliant. That would be great.
To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Are you enjoying this podcast? Help me make more episodes and videos by making a pledge at my Patreon page, patreon.com/KetoWoman. Or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman Podcast website. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman Podcast Instagram and Facebook pages, and Daisy_Keto Woman on Twitter. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from Aseem Malhotra's opening remarks at the conference, and he was talking about the changes needed to healthcare. It's not going to happen by evolution. It needs a revolution. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.